Give me a moment here. Sweet. So, I think I usually introduce myself every time, but I know most of you guys, so I guess I'll just skip over that part. But I just think it's so cool in today's reading, especially in the Exodus reading. It's always cool to see how in the past there's people that are just as ignorant as you are. You know what I mean? Because I think it's interesting to see, we think of the Israelites, and we think of, they were great people for sure, but it was God who made them great, right? And when I read this Exodus reading, I kind of start to think, wow, I have a lot more in common with them for how, the time that we have between us, the thousands of years or whatever, I still have so much in common with them. And I think that's just awesome to see. So there's three kind of ways that I think that we have certain commonalities with the Israelites. I may be speaking for myself, but you guys can hopefully judge that for yourselves. So one of them is that the hunger drove the Israelites to complain. And I don't know how many times you've been talking to somebody, and they've maybe said, you ask them how they're doing, and usually the answer is just good. People just say good. That's what a lot of people say. But some people will give usually two other answers, and it's either tired or hungry. I don't know why, that's just something, especially if you know them, they'll say oh, I'm hungry, or oh, I'm so tired, I've been working a lot, or something and that's fine. It's fine to lean on your friends for support and everything. But are your friends really there to give you food? You know what I mean? I don't think that's necessarily how that works. So I think that's something we have in common. And it's sort of that complaining too, just in general. We like to complain a lot, myself very much included. And I think that the next way is probably that the Israelites preferred slavery over the journey. And I think that's really just very provocative and interesting, because they say here, the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, and we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." So, basically, after God freed them from 400 years of slavery, they think that that's better than the life that God wants for them. And I think that's still very true today for us, because there's some things that we do in our day-to-day lives that aren't necessarily good for us. You know what I mean? Whether it's habits like smoking, or there's a number of things. Just the people you hang around, for example. It's just, there's certain things that we do that we could probably not do, but we do it anyways, just because we prefer the suffering that we know over the journey that we don't. And I think that's something we should strive just together to not do, because it doesn't really make sense. I mean, sure, hindsight's 20/20 here, because we know eventually what happens, but we know that God has a plan for our lives, right? It tells us that all the time in the Scripture. One of the most common lessons from any Scripture reading is that God has a plan for our lives. So when we do these things that hurt us, it hurts Him to see us going through that. So I think we should definitely try to not be as arrogant as they were to say that, oh, I preferred slavery over, searching for the promised land. And the third thing is that the Israelites lacked the foresight to see God's gift of bread, much like us. The word manna, as a lot of you guys probably know, means "what is it?" I think it's the direct translation. So it's just kind of a simple thing, but they didn't really know. And there's sometimes gifts will come into our lives. God will give us things, and we won't even know what they are, what they're for, or who they're from, for sure, until much later. So it's not good to take advantage of the good things we have in our life. So I think, definitely be joyful in what you have. That's definitely a thing that we can do to strive to not lack that intuition that they had. So that kind of brings us to the point that God's plan, as I was talking about, may not always seem like the most prudent path or the best path or even the most immediately gratifying path. But still, we know that eventually the Israelites made it to the promised land. It may not have been them, but it was their kids. And so we know that God fulfills his promises that he gave to Abraham, that he gave to the Israelites, to everybody. He fulfills his promises. So he gave us a promise that he would always be with us, that he has a plan for us, and that he loves us. And, that's a really big thing. I think sometimes we don't grasp the true, what that means. I mean, there's 8 billion people on this planet. People die and are born every second. That's a lot of people for God to say that he loves and is with all of it. And I think that really goes to show his power. And, he is definitely a mighty God. But I think that we should definitely, not be so caught up in our own ways so that we miss opportunities that God's put in our lives. And that's something that the Israelites probably didn't do. So we now go to Ephesians, and it tells us to strive to be better than what we were with human nature's confines on us. I always think this is interesting how it starts here. It says, I therefore the prisoner in the Lord. And I thought when Pastor gave me this, I was like, oh, that's probably like not, it's probably like a typo or something. But no, like that, it says the prisoner in the Lord. And it's weird to me because oftentimes we hear these messages of God gives us freedom, and which are true. We hear them a lot. So it seems kind of adverse to say the prisoner in the Lord. But I think what he means is basically that you are freed in the Lord to serve. It's kind of that whole premise that he's getting at with this, the prisoner in the Lord. Kind of like the Israelites. They were prisoners before. Literally, they were slaves. They had no freedoms. But eventually, they got out of the land of Egypt, and they were then prisoners in the Lord. But it's not, there's no longer that negative connotation with it, with that word prisoner. It's freeing, actually. And so it's cool how God can take, use Paul here to change words that, usually we associate them with such horrible things, being a prisoner, and change it into something so good. There's the message here at the beginning. It says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So those things, humility, gentleness, and patience, probably the least 3 things that are present in today's society, I would say. Humility, gentleness, and patience. That's something that you just don't really, you don't see that a lot. That's not a very common characteristic as humans to have. I mean, we strive to be patient with one another. We try to be humble as best we can. And we try to be gentle most of the time, but, every day we fail to do all of those things. And so I think we sometimes forget that when he's talking about the body of the Lord, he's talking about everybody on the planet. There's nobody that's not a part of that body. And so sometimes people may not know about the body, and they may not know their place in it, but that doesn't mean that they're not a part of it. They're a part of God's creation, and in that, they are a part of that body. So, there's one body, there's one Spirit. The repetition of one there is just so interesting because we're often so divided today, and I think that we forget that we are all a part of one body, one Spirit, like it says. So in that, we must encourage others in love to pursue what we know their spiritual gifts are. So sometimes, it's hard for us. We take all these inventories for spiritual gifts, right? But sometimes that introspection just isn't enough. We don't know exactly what we're good at. So sometimes it takes somebody else to say, hey, you're okay at preaching, man. You should do that a little bit more. And then you go up on here and you sometimes embarrass yourself. Sometimes people are kind of, okay, yeah, I get it. But it's something that other people sometimes have to tell you, this is something that I think you're really good at. And when you get that sort of that praise in that connection from other people, it lifts you up and you kind of think, hey, yeah, if they think that about me, then maybe other people will. And then you start to become more confident in the gifts that God's given you. So yeah, I think it's very important to have us as friends. So don't let somebody who is so talented, just wallow away and not use that. You know what I mean? I would, encourage them, be there for them, and definitely as a community, as a church, it's definitely something we should strive to do for one another. And I think in Ephesians it said, we must no longer be children tossed to and fro and blown about by every wind of the doctrine, by people's trickery, by their craftiness and deceitful scheming. So basically, we must no longer be children tossed to and fro and blown. I like that because I think that kind of goes along with the point before. I'm not calling the Israelites children, but I think that the way that they were behaving is kind of like a child would behave to their parents, Like, they don't really mean what they're saying, because obviously they prefer freedom over being actual slaves. Like, that goes without saying. I mean, but they're acting out, and they're saying that, they're complaining to God. And, I think it shows a lot that God heard them, because, God did so much for them, and I think it, to me it would seem disrespectful to talk to your parents, I guess, in that way. Not that I would have ever done anything like that before. I'm sure they'll attest to that. But yeah, so I think that that encouragement against that complacent suffering that the Israelites were a part of is another thing that, like I said, we should strive for. So I know I didn't spend so much time on John, and I don't really, I guess, have a reason, but I think that today I kind of try and give like a most important verse. Like if there's nothing else you did, try and think about this one verse. And I think that today that one verse is John 6:27, where it says, "Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, for it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." So do not work for the food that perishes. That food that perishes part. I think that today, there's a lot of sources of food, you could say, spiritually fulfilling food, emotionally fulfilling food, that perishes. It's not something that is going to fulfill you for a lifetime, for sure. It's something that's temporary. And I'm talking the habits I talked about before, sex, alcohol, drugs, all that kind of stuff. That's stuff that eventually will not provide you with the satisfaction that it once did. There's no one that is entirely satisfied in their life from just the stuff that's in life alone. There's no one. I think that you need some sort of connection to something that is, I guess, out of this world, but you need to believe in something. You know what I mean? And I think that being a part of the body of Christ is just a great way to rid yourself of those food items that perish. So yeah, that's definitely what I would say is the most important verse today. And it is the Son of Man, and I think we should definitely try to no longer be complacent in our own suffering. If there's something that's wrong in your life, then it's up to you to change that. But I know that, speaking from personal experience, when you start to kind of make those changes, your life definitely takes a different shape, and you start to see things that were blind to you before. And I think that's kind of just natural. If you're no longer being satiated by temporary things alone, and you're striving for something more, then you're probably going to see that something more in your life, which is definitely a benefit of doing so. So keep an open mind, be open to opportunities that may not seem like they're from God, but they might be. Just live your life in the way that God will be proud of you. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you.